They say the holidays are for family, for warmth and love. But that Christmas, my heart shattered louder than the ice poured in my glass. My own husband, words dripping with betrayal, raised his glass and toasted not to me, but to my sister, for the woman I've always loved. Today I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Eleanor, and I've been living in this cramped Brooklyn apartment for 37 years. The same yellowed wallpaper, the same creaky floorboards that groan under my feet every morning at 5:30. The hum of traffic on Atlantic Avenue never stops, mixing with the smell of coffee from the bodega downstairs and the distant sound of the subway rumbling beneath my world. Every morning, I drag myself out of bed, my arthritic hands already aching before I've even started the day. The kitchen counter is cluttered with pill bottles, blood pressure medication, arthritis pills, vitamins I take hoping they'll give me energy I lost years ago. I make coffee in the same chipped mug I've used for decades, watching the steam rise while I stare out at the brick wall of the building next door. My reflection in the toaster catches me off guard sometimes. When did my hair become so gray? When did these lines around my eyes deepen into canyons? I used to be beautiful. People used to tell me I lit up a room. Now I feel invisible even in my own home. The photo albums line our dusty bookshelf like tombstones of happier times. Pictures of my sister Margaret and me as children in matching Christmas dresses, our faces bright with innocent joy. Photos of Greg when we first met at that dance in Queens 42 years ago, his eyes full of promise and his smile genuine. Pictures of our son David's graduation, of family barbecues in our tiny backyard when we lived in Queens before the rent got too high. That Christmas Eve, I had spent hours preparing the meal I hoped would patch the silent cracks widening between us. The turkey was golden brown, the stuffing made from my mother's recipe that took me all morning to prepare. My hands were raw from peeling potatoes, my back aching from bending over the stove. The apartment smelled like cinnamon and cloves from the apple pie cooling on the windowsill. Margaret arrived with her usual dramatic flair, her voice filling the room before she'd even taken off her coat. She's always been the beautiful one, the charming one. 3 years younger than me, but she's aged like wine while I feel like I've aged like milk left in the sun. Her auburn hair is perfectly styled, her makeup flawless even at 62. She hugs Greg longer than she hugs me, and I pretend not to notice. We sit around our small dining table, the one Greg and I bought secondhand when we first married. The conversation flows around me like water around a stone. Margaret talks about her latest art class, her voice animated. Greg listens with an attention he hasn't given me in years. David, my son, scrolls through his phone, present but not really here. Then it happened. Greg stood up, his wine glass catching the light from the cheap chandelier we bought at a discount store 15 years ago. "I want to make a toast," he said, his voice carrying that theatrical tone he uses when he thinks he's being profound. I smiled, thinking finally. Some recognition, some acknowledgement of all the years I've held this family together, some appreciation for the meal I'd spent 2 days preparing. But instead, his eyes found Margaret. "For the woman I've always loved," he said, raising his glass in her direction. The words hit me like a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Margaret's smile, that knowing, satisfied smile, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. My mouth went dry. My hands started trembling. David looked up from his phone, confusion flickering across his face, but he said nothing. The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. I've always been the caretaker in this family, the one who fixes things, who smooths over problems, who sacrifices her own needs for everyone else's peace of mind. From the moment I married Greg, I poured every ounce of love and energy into building a life for us. I gave up my dream of becoming a teacher, took double shifts as a nurse's aide at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital to support his unreliable construction work. When Margaret's husband left her 15 years ago, who helped her move? Who listened to her cry for hours on the phone? Who lent her money when she couldn't make rent? When our mother got sick with dementia, who took time off work to drive her to appointments? Who cleaned her house, managed her medications, held her hand during those long, confused nights? Margaret would text me casually, "Can you cover Mom's physical therapy copay? I'm a little short this month." I always said yes, even when it meant choosing between groceries and rent. "Eleanor, can you take Mom to her appointment? I have a date." I rearranged my schedule, called in favors at work, did whatever it took. Greg's work became increasingly sporadic over the years. His back problems, he claimed, though I noticed he could lift cases of beer just fine when his buddies came over to watch football. I worked 60-hour weeks, came home to clean and cook, managed all our finances because he was too stressed to deal with numbers. "Ellie, you're so good at this stuff," he'd say, dumping bills and bank statements on the kitchen table. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I told myself that love meant service, sacrifice, putting others first. I told myself that my exhaustion was just part of being a good wife, a good sister, a good daughter. But their silences grew colder. Their gratitude became scarce. When I tried to bring up my concerns, dinner plans canceled at the last minute, phone calls that went unanswered for days, feeling like a stranger in my own family, Greg would give me that look, that patient, condescending look that made me feel small. "You're being dramatic, Ellie," he'd say. "You're imagining things. Maybe you should see someone about your anxiety." Margaret's laughter would drift from the living room, where she'd made herself comfortable on my couch, watching my television, eating food I'd bought with money I'd earned. Her laughter was light and carefree, the sound of someone who'd never worried about anyone but herself. I started doubting my own perceptions. Was I being too sensitive? Was I asking for too much? Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I wasn't enough, not interesting enough, not beautiful enough, not worthy of the love I craved. The signs were always there, but I was too afraid to see them. The way Greg's face would light up when Margaret called. The inside jokes they shared that left me standing outside their circle. The way he'd suddenly have energy for activities when she was around. Energy that never seemed available for me. Last Easter, I spent 3 days cooking for the family dinner. I made Greg's favorite honey ham, Margaret's preferred green bean casserole, special desserts for the grandchildren. My feet were swollen, my back screaming, but I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted to create the kind of family memory that would make them appreciate me. Margaret arrived 2 hours late, bringing nothing but apologies and that radiant smile. "Oh, Eleanor, you've outdone yourself again," she gushed. But her attention was already on Greg. They spent the entire meal discussing a movie they'd apparently seen together. When had that happened? While I served and cleared plates, refilled drinks, chased after the children, I realized that evening that I'd become invisible in my own life. A supporting character in a story where everyone else got to be the star. My birthday last September came and went without ceremony. Greg mumbled "happy birthday" over his morning coffee, but had clearly forgotten, until I mentioned having to work late, again, instead of celebrating. Margaret called 3 days later, claiming she'd been so busy with her art class that she'd lost track of time. I bought myself a small cake from the grocery store, lit a single candle in my empty kitchen, and made a wish that felt more like a prayer. Please let someone see me. Please let someone care. The cake tasted like sawdust and loneliness. When I got bronchitis in October and missed a week of work, no one checked on me. I lay in bed, feverish and aching, ordering soup delivery because I was too weak to cook. Greg stayed late at his friend Bobby's house every night that week, claiming he didn't want to catch whatever I had. Margaret was unreachable, apparently on some weekend trip she'd forgotten to mention. I recovered alone, returning to work still weak, still coughing because we needed the money, and no one else was going to earn it. The final blow came 3 days before that devastating Christmas. I was looking for our insurance papers in Greg's desk drawer when I found the envelope. It was from his lawyer's office, thick and official-looking. Inside was a document I couldn't quite understand at first, something about beneficiaries and bank accounts. My hands shook as I read it again, slowly this time. Greg had removed me as the beneficiary on our joint savings account, the account I'd been paying into for over 30 years, and added Margaret's name instead. The date on the document was 6 months earlier. 6 months. He'd been planning this for half a year and never said a word. I sat on our bedroom floor, the papers scattered around me like evidence of a crime. Everything made sense now. The secretive phone calls. The sudden interest in financial planning. The way he'd been encouraging me to work extra shifts, telling me every dollar helped our future. Our future. What a joke. I curled into a ball on the cold linoleum, my body shaking with silent sobs. The sound of my own breathing seemed too loud in the empty apartment. For the first time in my 65 years, I understood what it meant to feel truly abandoned. That night, when Greg came home reeking of beer and cigarettes, I said nothing. I served him the leftover meatloaf, watched him eat while scrolling through his phone, listened to him complain about his supervisor at the construction site. He went to bed without kissing me goodnight, without asking about my day, without noticing that my eyes were red from crying. I spent that night sitting at the kitchen table, staring at those legal documents, feeling like a fool. How long had I been living in a fantasy? How long had they been planning my irrelevance? The word no burned on my lips like acid. I'd forgotten how to refuse anyone anything. I'd trained myself out of having boundaries, convinced myself that love meant endless giving without expecting anything in return. But loneliness clawed at me with merciless fingers. If I stopped being useful, would anyone want me around at all? Was being used better than being alone? I packed the old family photos into a cardboard box that night, each image a reminder of what I'd thought we had. My wedding photo, where Greg's smile looked so genuine. Pictures of family vacations where everyone seemed happy. Birthday parties, graduations, holiday celebrations, all proof of a life that felt real at the time. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror as I carried the box to the closet. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Tired, defeated, invisible. When had I stopped seeing myself as someone worth loving? That Christmas Eve toast was just the final confirmation of what I'd discovered in those papers. Greg hadn't slipped or misspoken. He'd told the truth, probably for the first time in years. The days after Christmas blurred together in a haze of humiliation and rage. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate at work. My supervisor at the hospital asked if I was feeling all right, and I nearly broke down in the supply closet. I called for a family meeting, my voice shaking as I demanded everyone come to the apartment the following Sunday. Greg rolled his eyes. "What's this about, Ellie? You're being dramatic again." But something in my tone must have convinced him I was serious. They gathered in our cramped living room like defendants waiting for sentencing. Greg slouched in his recliner, already defensive. Margaret perched on the edge of the couch, her expression a careful mask of innocence. David sat between them, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "I know about the bank account," I said without preamble. "I know you removed me and added Margaret." Greg's face didn't change, but I caught the flicker of surprise in his eyes. "That's just financial planning, Ellie. Nothing to get worked up about." "Financial planning?" My voice cracked. "Financial planning is discussing major decisions with your wife. Financial planning isn't secretly replacing your wife with her sister on accounts she's been paying into for 30 years. Margaret finally spoke, her voice smooth as silk. "Eleanor, honey, this is all a misunderstanding. You're getting yourself upset over nothing. We're family. We look out for each other." The audacity of it took my breath away. After everything I'd done for her, every sacrifice I'd made, every time I'd put her needs before my own, she could sit in my living room and gaslight me like I was imagining things. "Look out for each other?" I laughed, and it sounded bitter even to my own ears. "When have you ever looked out for me, Margaret? When have either of you ever put my needs first?" "Mom," David said quietly, "maybe we should all just calm down and talk about this reasonably." But I was done being reasonable. I was done being calm. I was done being the one who made everyone else comfortable while I suffered in silence. "No," I said, and the word felt powerful. "No more talking. No more making excuses. No more pretending this is normal." Greg stood up, his face flushing red. "You're being ridiculous, Eleanor. If you can't handle adult decisions being made for the good of the family, maybe you should go stay with your cousin upstate for a while." The good of the family, as if stealing from me was somehow benefiting me. Whose family, Greg? Because, clearly, I'm not part of it. That's when Margaret's mask finally slipped. Her eyes flashed with something cold and calculation. "You know what your problem is, Eleanor? You've always been jealous of me. Ever since we were kids, you couldn't stand that people preferred me. This is just more of the same." The room went silent. David shifted uncomfortably. Greg didn't contradict her. And that's when I met Anna. It was the next week, at the laundromat on Fulton Street, where I'd been going for years because our building's machines never worked properly. I was sitting there watching my clothes spin, feeling like my life was spinning just as aimlessly, when this woman about my age struck up a conversation. Anna Rodriguez had recently moved to the neighborhood from the Bronx after her husband passed away. She was one of those people who radiated warmth without trying, who made you feel like you'd been friends for years within minutes of meeting her. "You look like you could use some coffee and conversation," she said, noticing my red eyes and the tissue box I'd been working my way through. Something about her genuine kindness broke through my defenses. I found myself telling her everything: the toast, the bank account, the years of feeling invisible in my own life. Anna listened without judgment, without trying to fix me or tell me what I should do. "Mija," she said when I finished, "you know what you need to do." And for the first time in months, I did know. The change started small. When Greg asked for money for what he claimed was an emergency, probably another night out with his buddies, I said no. The word came out stronger than I expected, echoing through the silence of our apartment like a bell. His face went through several expressions: surprise, annoyance, anger. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no. Figure it out yourself. Eleanor, don't be stupid. We're married. My problems are your problems." "No," I said again. "They're not. Not anymore." That night he slept on the couch. I expected to feel guilty, to lie awake worrying about him. Instead, I slept better than I had in years. The next day, I called the number Anna had given me for a counselor she'd found helpful after her husband's death. Dr. Sarah Chen had an office in Park Slope, a tiny space filled with plants and soft lighting that made me feel safe. "Tell me about yourself, Eleanor," she said during our first session. I realized I didn't know how to answer. For so long, I'd defined myself only in relation to other people. Greg's wife, Margaret's sister, David's mother. Who was I when I wasn't serving someone else's needs? "I don't know anymore," I admitted. "That's okay," Dr. Chen said. "We'll figure it out together." Opening my own bank account felt like committing a revolutionary act. I'd found my mother's old jewelry box in the closet, forgotten treasures I'd inherited when she passed 5 years ago. Inside was a small life insurance policy I'd never touched, meant to be saved for emergencies. Well, this felt like an emergency of the soul. The banker at Chase on Court Street treated me like I was opening a business account worth millions, instead of depositing a modest check. "What type of account were you thinking, Mrs. Patterson?" "One that only I have access to," I said firmly. For the first time in decades, I had money that was mine alone. Not much, but enough to feel like I had choices. Greg noticed the change immediately. I stopped doing his laundry. I stopped cooking elaborate meals that only he seemed to appreciate. I stopped asking about his day or listening to his complaints about work. "What's gotten into you?" he demanded one evening when he came home to find me reading a book instead of preparing dinner. "Make yourself a sandwich," I said without looking up from my pages. "Eleanor, this is ridiculous. You can't just stop being a wife because you're having some kind of midlife crisis." I looked at him then, really looked at him. This man I'd loved for over 40 years, who'd shared my bed and my dreams and my bank accounts, who'd betrayed me so casually he didn't even seem to understand why I was upset. "I haven't stopped being a wife, Greg. You stopped being a husband a long time ago." Margaret called the next day, her voice dripping with false concern. "Greg told me you're going through some kind of breakdown. Do you need help? Should I come over?" "I'm fine," I said. "Are you sure? Because this doesn't sound like you at all. You're usually so reasonable, so understanding, so easy to manipulate," she meant. "Maybe you don't know me as well as you think." There was a pause. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its syrupy sweetness. "Eleanor, I hope you're not going to let this imaginary drama affect our relationship. We're sisters." "Are we?" I asked. "Because sisters don't steal from each other. Sisters don't seduce each other's husbands. Sisters don't spend decades taking advantage of someone's kindness." "I don't know what you're talking about." But I heard the lie in her voice, and for the first time, I didn't pretend not to notice. My first real day of freedom started on a crisp February morning. No work scheduled, no obligations, no one asking me for anything. I made myself breakfast, real breakfast, not just coffee and toast grabbed on the run, and ate it slowly while reading the newspaper. The apartment felt different without the weight of resentment and obligation pressing down on me. Even the morning light seemed brighter coming through the same windows I'd looked out of for 37 years. I took the subway to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, something I'd been meaning to do for years but never had time for. I wandered through the Egyptian wing, the American paintings, the sculpture garden. I sat on a bench in the European galleries and just breathed. No one knew where I was. No one needed me. It should have felt lonely, but instead, it felt like freedom. That evening, Anna came over with homemade empanadas and a bottle of wine. We sat in my tiny kitchen, talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her late husband, about the good years and the difficult ones, about learning to live alone. "The hardest part," she said, "isn't being by yourself. It's learning to like your own company after years of believing you weren't enough." I thought about that for weeks afterward. When was the last time I'd enjoyed being alone with my thoughts? When had I stopped seeing myself as interesting, as worthy of my own attention? 6 months after that terrible Christmas, I called another family meeting. This time, it wasn't a request. David came reluctantly, clearly hoping to stay neutral in whatever war I was waging. Greg arrived already defensive, his jaw set in that stubborn line I knew so well. Margaret was last, making an entrance as usual, her perfectly applied lipstick and carefully styled hair, like armor. "I want to get a few things clear," I began, standing by the fireplace where our old family photo used to hang. "First, I know about the affair." Greg started to object, but I held up my hand. "I'm not interested in denials. I'm not interested in explanations. I'm telling you what's going to happen next." I reached for that family photo, the one from David's college graduation where we all looked so happy, so united. My hands didn't shake as I tore it slowly in half, right down the middle. The sound of ripping paper seemed to echo through the room. "I'm filing for divorce, Greg. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm claiming half of everything we built together. including the money you tried to steal from me. His face went white, then red. You can't do this, Eleanor. Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? You can't make it on your own. Watch me. Margaret leaned forward, her expression calculating. Eleanor, honey, you're upset. You're making decisions you'll regret. Think about the family. Think about David's children. Do you really want to tear apart their grandparents' marriage over some silly misunderstanding? The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, I almost admired it. There's no misunderstanding, Margaret. You've been having an affair with my husband, probably for years. You've been taking money from me while pretending to be my loving sister. You've been lying to my face while smiling and calling me family. That's not true, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. David, I turned to my son. I know this is hard for you. I know you want to stay neutral, but I need you to understand something. I will not buy love anymore. I will not sacrifice my dignity for anyone's comfort, not even yours. David looked stricken. Mom, I never asked you to. No, but you benefited from it. You all did, and that's okay. But it's over now. Respect me or lose me, I said, looking each of them in the eye. Those are your choices. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the mantel, the one my mother had given us as a wedding present. Greg tried threats first. If I divorced him, he'd fight me for everything. He'd tell people I was unstable, having a breakdown. Who would believe me over him? Margaret tried tears next, claiming I was destroying the only family she had left. Didn't our childhood mean anything to me? Didn't all those years of sisterhood count for something? But I'd learned something important in those months of counseling with Dr. Chen. Their emotions were not my responsibility. Their choices were not my fault. Their comfort was not worth my misery. I'm done, I said simply. With all of it. I thought that would be the end of it, the final chapter of a painful story. But life has a way of providing one last test when you think you've proven your strength. 2 weeks after our confrontation, I got a call from my neighbor, Mrs. Murphy. Eleanor, dear, I think you should know. There are some people in the building talking about you. It turned out that Margaret had been busy. She'd called every mutual friend, every neighbor who would listen, every family member she could think of. Her story was masterfully crafted. I was having a mental breakdown. I was making up stories about affairs and financial deception. I was being cruel to poor Greg, who'd done nothing but love me faithfully for 40 years. The crowning touch was an old email chain she'd somehow gotten hold of, messages between Greg and David discussing my increasingly erratic behavior and their concern for my mental health. The dates went back months, maybe years. They'd been building a case against me long before I'd discovered the truth. Some of our old friends started calling, their voices heavy with false sympathy. Eleanor, we heard what you're going through. Have you considered getting professional help? Maybe you should just forgive and forget. Marriage isn't perfect, but it's better than being alone. A few people at work began giving me odd looks, whispering when they thought I wasn't listening. Someone had clearly been spreading Margaret's version of events. The old Eleanor would have crumbled. She would have apologized, tried to defend herself, maybe even believed she really was losing her mind. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I sat in my kitchen that evening, reading the latest concerned email from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, and I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete calm. Let them think what they wanted. Let them choose Margaret's charming lies over my difficult truth. I was done performing sanity for people who preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable reality. The next morning, I did something I'd been dreaming about for months. I walked into my supervisor's office at the hospital and gave my 2 weeks' notice. Everything okay, Eleanor? She asked, concerned. Everything's perfect, I said, and meant it. I used the money from my mother's jewelry and insurance policy to book myself into an artist's retreat in Hudson Valley, 2 hours north of the city. I'd always loved drawing as a child, before life convinced me that artistic dreams were impractical luxuries I couldn't afford. The retreat was held at a converted barn on a working farm, surrounded by rolling hills and maple trees just starting to turn gold and crimson. My room was tiny but clean, with a view of mountains I'd almost forgotten existed. On my first morning there, I woke to the sound of birds instead of traffic. I made coffee in the communal kitchen and drank it on the porch, watching the sun rise over fields that stretched to the horizon. First time here? Asked the woman at the next easel during our first art class. First time anywhere, I said, realizing it was true. Her name was Janet, a retired teacher from Albany who'd been coming to the retreat for 3 years. She was warm and funny, with paint-stained fingers and laugh lines around her eyes. What made you come? She asked as we tried to capture the light filtering through the barn windows. I realized I'd never done anything just for myself, I said. And how does it feel? I considered this, mixing colors on my palette. Terrifying. And wonderful. My paintings were terrible at first. clumsy attempts at landscapes that looked like they'd been done by a determined child. But something about the process felt healing. The way the brush felt in my hand, the satisfaction of choosing my own colors, the permission to create something that didn't have to be perfect or useful to anyone else. Anna came to visit me on the third weekend, bringing news from the neighborhood and a care package of my favorite tea. We sat in the farm's garden, surrounded by late summer vegetables and wildflowers. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Different," I said. "Like I'm remembering who I used to be before I forgot." "Any regrets?" I thought about Greg, probably still living in our apartment, maybe with Margaret by now. I thought about David, torn between loyalty and love, probably confused by his mother's sudden transformation. I thought about all the years I'd spent sacrificing myself for people who'd never appreciated the gift. "None," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. That evening, I called David. He answered on the third ring, his voice cautious. "Hi, Mom. How are you doing up there?" "I'm painting," I told him. "Painting?" "Landscapes, mostly. I'm not very good yet, but I'm getting better." There was a pause. "Mom, about what happened with Dad and Aunt Margaret. How are your kids?" I asked, changing the subject. We talked for 20 minutes about his daughter's soccer games and his son's struggles with algebra. Normal conversation between a mother and son, without the weight of drama and obligation. "I miss you," he said before hanging up. "I miss you too, sweetheart. But I'm not going anywhere. When you're ready to have a relationship with me, the real me, I'll be here." I spent 3 weeks at that retreat, and by the end, something fundamental had shifted inside me. My paintings were still amateur, but they were mine. I'd made friends who knew nothing about my history, who cared about my opinions on art and books and politics rather than what I could do for them. When I returned to Brooklyn, I barely recognized my own reflection. My hair was longer, streaked with gray I'd stopped trying to hide. My skin had color from spending days outdoors. My eyes looked brighter, more alert, like I'd finally woken up from a long sleep. I'd found a small studio apartment in Park Slope, close to Dr. Chen's office and the museum. It was tiny but filled with light, and it was mine. The divorce proceedings moved slowly, but my lawyer assured me we had a strong case. Greg's attempt to hide assets worked against him, and Margaret's interference only strengthened my position. "Your husband seems to think you'll change your mind," my lawyer told me after one particularly contentious mediation session. "He keeps asking if we're sure you want to go through with this." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. Margaret made one last attempt to reconcile, showing up at my new apartment with crocodile tears and a sob story about family loyalty. I listened from behind my locked door as she knocked and pleaded. "Eleanor, please, we're sisters. We can work this out. I made a mistake, but don't throw away our whole relationship over one mistake." I could have opened the door. I could have let her in, listened to her justifications, maybe even believed her promises to change. The old Eleanor would have. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching her finally give up and walk away. Winter came early that year, but I didn't mind. My apartment was warm and peaceful. I'd enrolled in art classes at the local community center and discovered I had an eye for color that surprised my instructors. Anna had become a regular presence in my life, dropping by with food and stories, letting me know I wasn't truly alone. We went to movies together, explored new restaurants, took long walks in Prospect Park, discussing books and politics, and the strange ways life unfolds. "You know what I learned after my husband died?" she told me one snowy afternoon as we warmed up with coffee after walking around the lake. "What's that?" "The people who truly love you don't disappear when you finally start loving yourself." On a crisp morning in late March, almost a year after that devastating Christmas toast, I woke to find an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a card from David with a photo of his children, a recent school picture where they both looked happy and healthy. "Mom," the note read, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about respect. I think I understand now. Would you like to have lunch sometime? Just us. No agenda, no drama. I want to hear about your paintings." I held that card and let myself cry. Not tears of sadness or frustration, but of relief. My son was finding his way back to me. But more importantly, I was finding my way back to myself. The woman in the mirror that morning looked familiar again. Not the exhausted, defeated stranger I'd become, but someone I remembered from long ago. Someone who'd had dreams and opinions and value beyond her usefulness to others. I made my coffee in a mug I'd bought for myself, one with a painted sunrise that reminded me of mornings at the retreat. I sat by my window, looking out at the tree-lined street where children walked to school and neighbors called good morning to each other. My phone buzzed with a text from Anna. "Coffee later? I want to hear about your latest masterpiece." I smiled as I typed back, "It's a date." Later that day, I had lunch with David at a small cafe in my new neighborhood. We talked about his kids, his work, his struggles with watching his parents' marriage dissolve. He didn't try to fix anything or talk me into reconciling. He just listened. "Are you happy, Mom?" he asked as we finished our sandwiches. I considered the question seriously. Was I happy? I was alone more than I'd ever been. I had less money, a smaller apartment, fewer people in my daily life. My marriage was over. My relationship with my sister destroyed. My comfortable routines completely disrupted. "Yes," I said, surprising us both. "I think I am." "Good," he said quietly. "I'm proud of you." Those words meant more to me than 40 years of Greg's empty compliments or Margaret's manipulative praise. That evening, I set up my easel by the window and started a new painting. Not a landscape this time, but a self-portrait. I wanted to capture this moment, this feeling of finally coming home to myself. As I worked, mixing colors and making bold strokes I wouldn't have dared attempt a year ago, I thought about the toast that had shattered my world. Greg raising his glass, "For the woman I've always loved," speaking about Margaret while I sat invisible at my own table. He wasn't wrong exactly. He probably had always loved her. But what I understood now was that his love for her didn't diminish me. His inability to love me properly wasn't a reflection of my worth. I'd spent decades trying to earn something that was never available, fighting for scraps from people who saw me as disposable. The divorce was finalized on a bright day in May. I signed the papers in my lawyer's office, officially ending 42 years of marriage. I felt lighter walking out of that building than I had in decades. Greg got the apartment and most of the furniture, things I no longer wanted anyway. I got half our financial assets and my freedom. Margaret could have him and whatever future they chose to build on the foundation of my pain. I used some of my settlement money to book another artist's retreat, this time in California. I wanted to see the ocean, to paint sunsets over water instead of buildings. "You're becoming quite the traveler," Anna observed as she helped me pack. "I'm making up for lost time," I said. The retreat was even better than I'd hoped. I shared a house with 5 other women, all of us there for our own reasons, all of us learning to create something beautiful from whatever materials we'd been given. One evening, as I painted the sunset from the deck of our rental house, one of my new friends asked about my story. "I used to think my life was over when my marriage ended," I told her, adding purple shadows to my canvas. "Now I think it was just beginning." "How long were you married?" 42 years. "And how long have you been divorced?" 6 months. She smiled. "Trust me, it gets even better." I returned to Brooklyn with a suitcase full of paintings and a heart full of possibilities. My little apartment welcomed me back like an old friend. Anna had watered my plants and left flowers on the kitchen table. That fall, I enrolled in a more advanced art program at Pratt Institute. My instructor, a woman about my age who'd started painting professionally after her children left home, encouraged me to submit work to a group show featuring older artists. "Age is not a limitation," she told our class. "It's just a different kind of qualification." 3 of my paintings were accepted into the show. Nothing sold, but seeing my work hanging on gallery walls felt like a victory anyway. David came to the opening, bringing his children, my grandchildren who barely remembered the exhausted, resentful woman I used to be. They seemed fascinated by this new grandmother who painted pictures and lived alone and ordered pizza for dinner without apologizing for not cooking. "Grandma Eleanor's paintings are cool," my granddaughter whispered loudly, making me laugh. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, meaning it more than she could know. That Christmas, I hosted my own celebration in my small apartment. Anna came with her famous empanadas. David brought his family and a bottle of wine. A few friends from my art classes stopped by with desserts and stories. No one toasted anyone except the collective joy of being together. No one demanded performances or sacrifices. No one made me feel invisible or unwanted. As I looked around my tiny living room, filled with laughter and conversation and genuine affection, I realized something profound. I had created exactly the family I'd always wanted. Not through blood or obligation, but through choice and mutual respect and love that didn't require me to diminish myself to earn it. Spring arrived early that second year. I'd been divorced for over a year, living alone for 10 months, painting seriously for almost 2 years. The woman who had sat at that Christmas dinner table, watching her husband toast her sister, felt like someone from another lifetime. I was walking through Prospect Park, sketchbook in hand, when my phone rang. Margaret's name appeared on the screen, the first time she'd tried to contact me in months. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Hello, Eleanor." Her voice was different, smaller, less confident than I remembered. "Margaret. I was wondering if we could talk, maybe meet for coffee?" I sat down on a park bench, watching ducks paddle across the lake. "What about?" "About us. About what happened. About whether there's any way to fix this." I took a deep breath of spring air, sweet with the scent of cherry blossoms. There's nothing to fix, Margaret. You made your choices. I made mine. But we're sisters. No, I said gently. We're related. There's a difference. She tried to argue, to explain, to justify. I listened for a while, not out of hope for reconciliation, but out of curiosity. Her words sounded hollow now, manipulative techniques that no longer had power over me. I have to go, I said when she paused for breath. Eleanor, please don't hang up. We can work this out. We're family. Take care of yourself, Margaret. I hung up and turned off my phone. The ducks were still paddling peacefully across the water. The sun was still shining through new green leaves. My world hadn't collapsed from saying no to her one final time. That afternoon, I painted those ducks, trying to capture their calm movement through water that reflected the sky like a mirror. My paintings had improved dramatically over the past 2 years. I'd developed my own style, bold colors, emotional landscapes, portraits that seemed to glow with inner light. More importantly, I'd developed my own voice. You know what I love about your work? My instructor told me as we reviewed my latest pieces. They look like freedom. I thought about that comment for days. Freedom. Yes, that was exactly what they looked like. The freedom to be imperfect, to experiment, to create something that pleased only me. The freedom to fail without anyone's disappointed sighs, to succeed without having to share credit. That summer, I took my most adventurous trip yet, a painting workshop in Tuscany. I'd never been to Europe, never imagined I could afford such extravagance. But the settlement from my divorce, combined with careful saving and the elimination of supporting other people's expensive habits, had given me resources I'd never had before. The workshop was held at a villa in the Chianti region, surrounded by vineyards and olive groves that seemed to glow gold in the evening light. I shared meals with artists from around the world, painted landscapes that took my breath away, and discovered I could navigate foreign train stations and order dinner in broken Italian without anyone's help. You seem different this trip, observed Maria, a painter from Portugal who'd become my roommate and friend. Different how? Calmer. More yourself, if that makes sense. It made perfect sense. I was more myself than I'd been in decades, maybe ever. On our last night at the villa, we had a farewell dinner on the terrace overlooking acres of grapevines. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that no artist could truly capture, I raised my glass of local wine. To second chances, I said. To second chances, the group echoed. But I knew it wasn't really a second chance. It was my first chance to live as the person I'd always been underneath the layers of obligation and self-sacrifice, and the desperate need to be loved by people incapable of truly loving anyone. I returned to Brooklyn with a suitcase full of paintings and a heart full of peace. Anna met me at the airport, eager to hear about my adventures and see my latest work. You look different, she said as we drove through familiar neighborhoods that seemed both foreign and welcoming after 2 weeks in Italy. I feel different. Good different? Complete different. That fall, something remarkable happened. A gallery in Manhattan invited me to participate in a group show featuring emerging artists over 60. The theme was late bloomers, artists who'd found their voices later in life. My painting of the Tuscan sunset was featured on the promotional materials. Seeing my work advertised in art magazines and websites felt surreal, like someone else's dream I'd accidentally stepped into. The opening was everything I'd never dared to imagine. My paintings hung on professional gallery walls with proper lighting and elegant labels. People I didn't know stood in front of my work, discussing composition and color and emotional impact. David came with his whole family. Anna brought flowers. Several friends from my art classes celebrated with champagne and genuine pride in my success. But the moment that mattered most came when a young woman approached me near my painting of the park ducks. "Excuse me, are you Eleanor Patterson?" she asked. "Yes. I love your work. There's something so hopeful about it, so resilient. Like whoever painted these has been through something difficult and come out stronger." I thought about that woman's words for weeks afterward. Resilient, hopeful, stronger. Yes, that was exactly who I'd become. The holidays that second year felt like a celebration rather than an endurance test. I hosted Christmas dinner again, but this time for the family I'd chosen. Anna and her daughter who'd driven down from Albany, David and his family, 3 friends from my art classes, and a neighbor who would have spent the day alone otherwise. We ate good food and shared stories and laughed until my cheeks hurt. No one performed for anyone else's approval. No one diminished themselves to make others comfortable. No one raised a toast that shattered anyone's heart. As I looked around my crowded little apartment, filled with warmth and genuine affection, I thought about Christmases past. All those years of elaborate meals designed to win love that was never available. All those carefully chosen gifts intended to purchase approval. All those forced smiles hiding pain that felt too dangerous to acknowledge. I wouldn't trade those difficult years because they'd taught me something invaluable. The difference between being used and being loved, between performing worthiness and simply being worthy, between earning affection and recognizing it when it appears freely. "What are you thinking about?" Anna asked, sitting beside me as our guests lingered over coffee and dessert. How long it took me to learn the difference between being alone and being lonely. And I was lonely for 40 years with a house full of people. Now I'm alone, and I've never been less lonely in my life. She nodded, understanding. The right kind of solitude is healing. The wrong kind of togetherness is poisonous. As winter deepened into its coldest months, I found myself looking back on my transformation with something approaching amazement. 2 years ago, I'd been a woman who couldn't say no, who believed she had to earn every scrap of affection, who'd made herself so small and accommodating that she'd nearly disappeared entirely. Now I filled my own space completely. My opinions mattered, at least to me. My time was precious because I chose how to spend it. My energy went to people and activities that nourished me rather than depleted me. The divorce had cost me a marriage, but it wasn't a marriage worth keeping. The confrontation with Margaret had cost me a sister, but she'd never been the sister I deserved anyway. The decision to stop subsidizing everyone else's life had cost me the illusion of being needed, but I'd discovered something better, being wanted for who I was rather than what I could provide. I still missed David sometimes, not the guilt-ridden, obligated relationship we'd had, but the closer connection I'd hoped we might build. He called regularly now, visited when he could, included me in his children's lives without drama or conditions. He'd grown into the kind of man who could love his mother without trying to fix or manage her. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he'd told me recently. "I know this couldn't have been easy." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," I'd replied. Spring came again, bringing with it opportunities I couldn't have imagined. A local college asked me to teach a continuing education class in painting for older adults. A magazine wanted to feature my story in an article about women who'd reinvented themselves after 60. But the opportunity that excited me most was simple. Anna and I planned a trip to Maine to paint lighthouses and coastal scenes. No husbands to consult, no other people's schedules to accommodate, no one to please but ourselves. "Can you believe we're doing this?" Anna asked as we packed our art supplies and comfortable clothes. "No," I admitted, "but I can't believe most of my life these days." The Maine trip was everything I'd hoped and more. We stayed in a bed and breakfast overlooking a rocky coastline, woke to the sound of waves and seagulls, painted until the light faded, and then sat on the porch with wine and conversation that ranged from profound to ridiculous. "Eleanor," Anna said on our last evening there, "what do you think you would tell your younger self if you could?" I considered the question while watching the lighthouse beam sweep across dark water. "I think I would tell her that she's enough, just as she is, without performing or proving or sacrificing herself for other people's comfort. I would tell her that real love doesn't require you to become smaller, and that anyone who needs you to disappear isn't worthy of your light." Good advice. Advice I probably wouldn't have listened to 40 years ago. "Would you change anything? If you could go back?" I thought about all the years of giving myself away, all the opportunities I'd missed while serving other people's dreams, all the pain I'd endured in pursuit of love that was never going to be available. "No," I said, surprising myself with the certainty. If I'd learned these lessons earlier, I might not appreciate them as much. If I'd been stronger sooner, I might take my strength for granted now. "So you're grateful for the struggle?" "I'm grateful for who I became because of it." We sat in comfortable silence, watching stars appear over water that stretched to the horizon. I felt complete in a way I'd never experienced before. Not because I'd found another person to complete me, but because I'd finally found all the pieces of myself I'd scattered in service of other people's happiness. The drive back to New York gave me time to reflect on how fundamentally my life had changed. 2.5 years ago, I'd been a woman who defined herself entirely through her relationships with others. Now I had a rich inner life, creative pursuits that challenged and fulfilled me, friendships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. I'd learned to cook for one without feeling pathetic. I'd learned to go to movies alone without embarrassment. I'd learned to travel solo without fear. Most importantly, I'd learned to enjoy my own company, to find myself interesting and worthy of my own attention. My art had become a language I used to process emotions I'd spent decades suppressing. My divorce had become a liberation rather than a failure. My solitude had become a sanctuary rather than a punishment. But perhaps the most significant change was this. I no longer waited for other people to validate my worth. I no longer performed for love or twisted myself into shapes designed to please others. I'd learned the difference between someone who loved me and someone who loved what I could do for them. The drive home took us through small towns and rolling countryside that reminded me of my paintings. I found myself mentally composing new pieces, eager to get back to my easel and capture the colors of autumn fields and late afternoon light on old barns. "You know what I love about you now?" Anna said as we neared the city. "What's that?" "You're excited about your own life. You used to seem like you were just enduring things. Now you seem like you're actually living them." She was right. I was living my life for the first time in decades. Maybe ever. Not waiting for permission, not asking for approval, not sacrificing my own dreams for other people's comfort. That evening, back in my apartment that felt more like home than anywhere I'd ever lived, I called David to share stories from the trip. "You sound happy, Mom," he said. "I am happy. I'm glad. You deserve to be." After we hung up, I sat by my living room window with a cup of tea, looking out at the neighborhood I'd chosen, in the life I'd created, surrounded by art I'd made and books I'd selected and silence I'd learned to treasure. My phone showed no urgent messages, no demands for my attention, no crises requiring my immediate sacrifice. For the first time in memory, nothing was expected of me except what I expected of myself. I thought about Margaret, probably still playing the victim in her story about our estrangement. I thought about Greg, possibly happy with his new life, or possibly discovering that the problem in our marriage hadn't been entirely my fault. I thought about all the people who'd benefited from my endless giving without ever reciprocating. But I found I could think about them all without anger, without resentment, almost without emotion at all. They'd chosen their paths, and those choices had freed me to choose mine. As autumn deepened toward winter, I prepared for my third Christmas as a divorced woman. The holiday that had once symbolized my invisibility and pain had become something I looked forward to, an opportunity to celebrate with people who valued my presence rather than my performance. I spent December afternoons in my art studio, working on paintings that would become gifts for the people who'd enriched my life. Anna deserved a sunset from our main trip. David's family would get a painting of Prospect Park where we'd walk together and slowly rebuilt our relationship. My art instructor would receive a still life of the brushes and paints that had helped me find my voice. Creating these gifts felt different from the desperate holiday shopping of my married years. Instead of trying to purchase affection through expensive presents I couldn't afford, I was offering pieces of myself, my time, my creativity, my love translated into color and light. Christmas Eve found me in my kitchen, preparing a feast that was manageable rather than impressive. Good food, but nothing that required days of preparation or sacrifice of my own enjoyment. Anna was bringing her famous empanadas. David was bringing wine. My art class friends were bringing various sides and desserts. No one was coming to be served. Everyone was coming to contribute, to celebrate together rather than to be entertained by my exhausted performance of hostess perfection. As I set the table with mismatched plates I'd collected from thrift stores, each one chosen because I liked it rather than because it matched some arbitrary standard, I thought about that terrible Christmas toast 3 years ago. "For the woman I've always loved," Greg had said, looking at Margaret while I sat invisible at my own table. If he walked in now and made the same toast, I realized it wouldn't wound me. Not because I no longer cared, but because his love or lack thereof no longer determined my worth. His inability to see my value had been his limitation, not my deficiency. The doorbell rang, followed by Anna's voice calling, "Merry Christmas," through the door. Soon my small apartment filled with laughter and conversation and the kind of warmth that comes from genuine affection rather than obligated attendance. As we gathered around my little table, I looked at each face, chosen family, people who'd entered my life when I was finally ready to be loved properly. These people knew my story, had watched me transform from a wounded woman afraid of her own voice into someone who painted her emotions and traveled solo and said no without apologies. "Should we make a toast?" David asked, raising his wine glass. "Yes," I said, standing and lifting my own glass, "to finding ourselves wherever we are in life, to the courage to change what isn't working, and to the people who love us, not for what we can do for them, but for who we are when we're brave enough to be genuine. To Eleanor," Anna added, "for showing us all what resilience looks like." As our glasses touched and the sound of celebration filled my home, I felt a completeness I'd never experienced. Not the desperate satisfaction of finally pleasing difficult people, but the deep contentment that comes from living authentically, from surrounding yourself with love that doesn't require you to shrink or perform or sacrifice your essential self. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were washed and put away, I sat in my favorite chair with the painting I'd been working on, a self-portrait that captured something I'd never seen in mirrors during all those years of marriage. The woman in the painting looked directly at the viewer with clear, confident eyes. She was older than I'd been when I started this journey, gray-haired and lined by experience, but she radiated a strength that came from surviving storms and choosing to bloom anyway. This was who I'd become, a woman who could be alone without being lonely, who could love others without losing herself, who could give generously without feeling depleted because the giving came from abundance rather than desperate hope. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret, the first contact I'd had with her in over a year. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor. I think about you often and hope you're well." A year ago, that message might have stirred up old pain or false hope. Tonight, I read it with the same mild interest I might feel for news about a distant acquaintance. "Thank you," I typed back. "Merry Christmas to you, too." That was enough. No anger, no forgiveness, no drama. Just acknowledgement that we were both human beings who'd shared history and then chosen different paths. I turned off my phone and returned to my painting, adding final touches to the eyes that seemed to hold everything I'd learned about myself and life and love. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, dusting the street with white that would be gray and slushy by morning. But from my warm apartment, surrounded by my own choices and my own beauty and my own hard-won peace, it looked magical. This was my life now. Not the life I'd planned when I was young and full of romantic notions about marriage and family. Not the life I'd settled for during those long years of invisible servitude. But the life I'd created from the ashes of old dreams, built with materials I'd gathered through loss and disappointment, and the gradual, painful, magnificent process of learning to value myself. I thought about younger women who might be where I'd been, giving themselves away piece by piece, believing that love required self-erasure, accepting crumbs from people who should be offering feasts. If I could tell them anything, it would be this: your worth is not determined by how much others need you or use you. Your value doesn't depend on your ability to sacrifice yourself for someone else's comfort. Real love, the kind worth having, doesn't require you to become smaller or quieter or less than what you are. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to discover that being alone is better than being invisible in someone else's life. It's never too late to paint your own pictures, both literally and metaphorically. The Christmas lights across the street blurred through my tears. Not tears of sadness, but of gratitude for this second chapter I'd almost been too afraid to write. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities. More painting, more friends, more adventures in this life I'd finally learned to live on my own terms. The woman who'd sat at that devastating Christmas dinner, watching her husband toast her sister, was gone forever. In her place sat someone I was still getting to know but already loved. Eleanor Patterson, artist, survivor, free woman. And that, I realized as snow continued to fall outside my chosen windows in my chosen life, was the most beautiful gift I could have given myself. But my story doesn't end there. Because 3 years into my new life, something happened that tested every lesson I'd learned about self-worth and boundaries, and the kind of love that actually matters. I was at the easel in my apartment on a Tuesday morning in February, working on a commission piece. Yes, someone was actually paying me for my art now, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. "Eleanor? This is Dr. Martinez from Brooklyn Methodist Hospital." My stomach dropped. This was the hospital where I used to work, where I still had connections. "I'm calling about Gregory Patterson. You're listed as his emergency contact." Emergency contact. After 3 years of divorce, apparently no one had bothered to update his paperwork. Or maybe there was no one else to list. "What happened?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "He's had a heart attack. A significant one. He's stable for now, but..." The doctor's voice carried that careful tone medical professionals use when the news isn't good. "Is there family we should notify? Anyone who should be here?" I thought about Margaret. Where was she in all this? But I found myself saying, "I'll be right there." As I gathered my coat and keys, I wondered why I was going. Not out of love, that had died long before our marriage officially ended. Not out of obligation. I owed Greg nothing after what he'd put me through. Maybe it was simple human decency, or maybe I needed to see for myself that this chapter of my life was truly closed. Brooklyn Methodist's cardiac unit smelled the same as it had when I worked there. Antiseptic and fear, and that peculiar hospital coffee that never quite covered the underlying sense of illness and worry. I found Greg in room 314, connected to machines that beeped and whirred, monitoring a life that suddenly seemed very fragile. He looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. His hair had gone completely gray, and the bravado that had carried him through our confrontations was nowhere to be seen. When he saw me, his eyes filled with something that might have been remorse. "Ellie," he said, his voice weak. "You came. The hospital called. Where's Margaret?" A shadow crossed his face. It didn't work out. Turned out she wasn't interested in taking care of a sick old man. I might have felt vindicated once. Now I just felt tired. "What happened, Greg?" "Heart attack at the construction site. Bobby found me collapsed by the equipment truck. He tried to sit up straighter but gave up almost immediately. Doctor says I need surgery, triple bypass, high risk at my age. I pulled the visitor chair closer to his bed, not out of affection, but because I could see he was struggling to speak. Do you have insurance? He laughed bitterly. Some, not enough. Not nearly enough for this. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Finally, Greg spoke again. I know you hate me, Ellie. I know I gave you every reason to, but I need to tell you something. You don't need to tell me anything. Yes, I do. His eyes met mine with more honesty than I'd seen from him in years. I was a coward. A selfish, stupid coward. I convinced myself that what I felt for Margaret was love, but it wasn't. It was just easier. She never expected anything from me, never challenged me to be better. I didn't respond. This wasn't about forgiving him or absolving him. This was about him finding peace with his own choices. You scared me, he continued. Your strength, your goodness. It made me see how small I was, how little I'd accomplished. It was easier to tear you down than to build myself up. Why are you telling me this? Because if I die and the doctors aren't making any promises, I want someone to know that I knew. I knew what I threw away. I knew what I lost. A nurse came in to check his vitals, giving me a moment to process his words. When we were alone again, I made a decision that surprised even me. I'll stay until your surgery tomorrow, I said. But not because I owe you anything, because no one should face that alone. Ellie, don't read anything into it, Greg. This is just human kindness. Nothing more. I called Anna from the hospital cafeteria to tell her where I was. She listened without judgment, then said simply, do what feels right for your own peace of mind, not for anyone else's. I spent that night in the uncomfortable hospital chair, dozing fitfully while Greg slept. Nurses came and went, checking on him, adjusting his medications. In the early morning hours, when the hospital was at its quietest, he woke and found me still there. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for you. I know. That makes it even more. You always were the better person, Ellie. I'm not better. I'm just different. I learned to value myself. Before they took him to surgery, David arrived. I'd called him the night before, thinking he should know his father was facing a potentially life-threatening operation. He looked uncomfortable seeing me there, probably confused about what my presence meant. Mom, you don't have to do this, he said quietly. I know, but I'm here now. We waited together in the surgical waiting room. An awkward reunion played out against mint green walls and institutional furniture. David brought coffee from the cafeteria, and we made small talk about his kids, his work, anything but the obvious question hanging between us. Finally, he asked what I'd been expecting. Do you think you and Dad might— No, I said firmly. Whatever happens, that part of my life is over. I'm here because it's the right thing to do, not because I want to resurrect something that was broken long before we ended it. The relief on his face was unmistakable. Good. I mean, I love Dad, but I've seen who you've become since the divorce. I've seen how happy you are. I wouldn't want you to give that up. After 4 hours, the surgeon came to tell us the operation had been successful, but that Greg's recovery would be long and uncertain. He'd need rehabilitation, someone to help manage his medications, assistance with daily tasks while his body healed. Is there family who can help with his care? The doctor asked. David and I looked at each other. He had his own family, his own responsibilities. Margaret had apparently disappeared when the situation became inconvenient. Greg's drinking buddies wouldn't be organizing a care schedule. I'll figure something out, I heard myself say. Later, as we sat beside Greg's bed in the cardiac recovery unit, David asked me the question I'd been dreading. Mom, what did you mean when you said you'd figure something out? I'd been asking myself the same thing. Not because I felt obligated to care for my ex-husband, but because I was trying to understand what I owed as a human being to another human being who had no one else. I don't know yet, I admitted. I'm not taking him into my home. I'm not becoming his caretaker. I'm not sacrificing the life I've built, but I also can't walk away knowing he has no one. Over the following days, while Greg slowly recovered, I researched options. There were assisted living facilities that specialized in cardiac recovery, home health aides who could provide daily assistance, programs for people with limited insurance coverage. I wasn't doing this out of love or guilt or some misguided hope for reconciliation. I was doing it because I could afford to help. My settlement, careful savings, and limited expenses had given me resources I'd never had during our marriage. And because the woman I'd become was capable of kindness without attachment, of helping without enslaving herself. You know, Anna said when I explained my plans, this might be the ultimate test of how much you've really changed. What do you mean? If you can help him without losing yourself, without falling back into old patterns, then you'll know for certain that you're free. She was right. The old Eleanor would have either walked away in justified anger or thrown herself into caregiving at the expense of her own well-being. The new Eleanor could find a middle path, compassionate but boundaried, helpful but not self-sacrificing. I arranged for Greg to move into a cardiac rehabilitation center in Queens, close enough for David to visit regularly, but far enough from my life to maintain appropriate distance. I paid the portion his insurance didn't cover, not as a gift but as a loan with specific terms and conditions. I don't expect you to pay this back, I told him before he was discharged. But I want you to understand that this is a one-time thing. I'm not your safety net, your backup plan, or your retirement fund. After this, you'll need to take responsibility for your own life. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I understand. And Eleanor, I'm grateful. More grateful than I can say. Use this chance to build something better for yourself, I said. Not for me, not to win me back, but because you deserve to be more than the man who threw away his life for someone else's attention. Over the following months, I visited Greg occasionally at the rehabilitation center. Not out of affection, but to monitor his progress and ensure he was following through on his recovery plan. I brought books sometimes, crossword puzzles, small things to help pass the time. Our conversations were cordial but careful. Two people who shared a long history but no longer shared a life. He told me about his physical therapy sessions, his newfound appreciation for simple activities he'd taken for granted. He spoke about David's visits, about getting to know his grandchildren better than he had when his priorities were elsewhere. I've been thinking about what you said, he told me during one visit, about building something better. I don't think I know how. You learn, I said simply. The same way anyone learns anything new. One day at a time, one choice at a time. Would you be willing to help me figure it out? The old Eleanor would have said yes immediately, would have seen his vulnerability as proof that he'd finally changed, that he finally needed her in the way she'd always wanted to be needed. The new Eleanor saw the request for what it was, another attempt to make me responsible for his transformation. No, Greg, that's not my job anymore. That was never my job. You have counselors here, therapists, support groups. Use those resources. Build your own path. He looked disappointed, but not surprised. You really have changed, haven't you? I've finally learned the difference between helping someone and enabling them, between loving someone and losing yourself. As spring turned to summer, Greg's recovery progressed well enough that he was able to move into a small apartment near the rehabilitation center. He found part-time work with a community organization, helping other men his age navigate health crises and life transitions. It suited him, this role of peer counselor, someone who'd made mistakes and learned from them. David kept me updated on his father's progress, and I was genuinely glad to hear that Greg seemed to be building something resembling a meaningful life. Not because I wanted him back, but because his transformation meant my kindness hadn't been wasted, that my boundaries hadn't prevented him from growing. He asks about you sometimes, David told me over lunch one afternoon. That's normal. We were married for a long time, but I hope he's not asking because he thinks there's a chance for reconciliation. No, I don't think so. I think he's trying to understand how you did it, how you changed so completely. I thought about that conversation for days afterward. How had I changed? It hadn't been a single dramatic moment, but a series of small choices, each one building on the last. The choice to say no, the choice to leave, the choice to seek counseling, the choice to try something new, the choice to surround myself with people who valued me, the choice to help Greg recover without sacrificing my own peace. Each choice had been a small act of self-love, a tiny rebellion against the voice in my head that said I wasn't good enough, smart enough, worthy enough to demand better treatment. That fall, my art instructor invited me to participate in a solo show, my first ever. The gallery was small, tucked into a converted brownstone in Park Slope, but seeing my name on the promotional materials felt like a miracle. Eleanor Patterson, Landscapes of Liberation, the poster read, featuring my painting of the lighthouse from Maine. Below it, a brief bio that began, Eleanor Patterson began painting seriously at age 65, following a major life transition. Major life transition. Such polite language for the destruction and reconstruction of an entire identity. The opening reception was unlike anything I'd experienced. My paintings hung in a professional space with proper lighting and elegant labels. People I didn't know discussed my work with genuine interest, asking about my technique and inspiration. Several pieces sold that evening, not for huge amounts, but enough to validate that my art had value beyond my own therapeutic needs. Anna came, of course, along with David and his family. My art class friends filled the small gallery with warmth and celebration. Dr. Chen made a surprise appearance, smiling as she watched me navigate conversations with potential buyers and art critics. "How does it feel?" she asked as the evening wound down. "Surreal," I admitted. "Like someone else's life." "No," she said gently, "like your life. The one you always deserved, but were afraid to claim." As the gallery began to empty, a woman about my age approached me. She'd been standing in front of my self-portrait for most of the evening, studying it with intense focus. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm Maria Santos. I write for Brooklyn Arts Weekly. I was wondering if you might be interested in an interview." "An interview? Your work is remarkable, but what strikes me most is the story behind it. Starting a professional art career at 65, after what I gather was a difficult personal experience, that's inspiring to a lot of people, women especially." I thought about the question Anna had asked me in Maine, about what I'd tell my younger self. Maybe there were other women out there who needed to hear that it's never too late to choose yourself, never too late to discover that being alone is better than being invisible in someone else's life. "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." The interview took place a week later in the same cafe where David and I had reconciled months earlier. Maria Santos turned out to be a thoughtful journalist who asked probing questions about my transformation without sensationalizing the pain that had preceded it. "What would you say to women who find themselves in similar situations?" she asked. "Women who feel invisible in their own lives, who've spent decades putting everyone else's needs first." I considered the question carefully, thinking about all the women I'd met at the art retreats, in Dr. Chen's waiting room, at the gallery opening, women who understood the particular exhaustion that comes from loving people who see you only for what you can provide. I would tell them that their worth doesn't depend on how much others need them or use them. That real love, the kind worth having, doesn't require you to become smaller, and that it's never too late to choose yourself, even if that choice comes with a cost. Any regrets about the cost? None. The marriage I ended wasn't worth preserving. The family relationships I lost were never actually supporting me. The only regret I have is waiting so long to value myself. The article came out 2 weeks later, with the headline, "Never Too Late: How One Brooklyn Woman Found Herself at 65. It was accompanied by a photo of me in my studio, surrounded by paintings that told the story of my liberation in color and light. I expected a few people might read it and perhaps be moved by the story. What I didn't expect was the flood of emails and letters that began arriving within days of publication. Women from across the city, across the country, across the world, writing to thank me for sharing my story. "Dear Eleanor," one letter began, "I'm 58 and have been married for 32 years to a man who treats me like a convenience rather than a partner. Reading your article gave me hope that it's not too late to change my life. I'm 71, wrote another woman, and thought I was too old to start over. Your paintings and your story have inspired me to finally take that photography class I've been dreaming about for decades." The letters kept coming, dozens of them, each one telling a story of awakening, of women who'd recognized themselves in my journey and found courage to begin their own transformations. I answered every single one, offering encouragement and resources, sharing the lessons I'd learned about boundaries and self-worth and the kind of love that actually nourishes rather than depletes. Some women wrote back months later with updates on their progress. Divorces filed, apartments rented, art classes begun, therapy started. Small acts of rebellion against lives that had become too small to contain their authentic selves. One letter particularly moved me, from a woman named Patricia in Oregon. "Dear Eleanor, I wanted you to know that your article probably saved my life. I was so lost, so invisible in my own home, that I'd started thinking about ending things. But reading about your transformation at 65 made me realize I still had time to discover who I really am. I've left my husband, found a small apartment, and adopted a rescue dog named Freedom. I'm learning to paint, just like you. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to choose life. Real life." I kept Patricia's letter on my easel as I worked, a reminder of why sharing our stories matters, why vulnerability in service of others' healing is always worthwhile. As winter approached again, I found myself reflecting on the strange turns my life had taken. 4 years ago, I'd been invisible in my own marriage, bankrolling my sister's lifestyle while slowly disappearing into resentment and exhaustion. Now I was a professional artist, a published interview subject, a voice of hope for women who'd lost themselves in service to others. The transformation hadn't been dramatic or sudden. It had been a series of small, brave choices. Saying no, leaving, seeking help, trying something new, surrounding myself with people who valued me, helping others without sacrificing myself. Each choice had been an act of faith, faith that I deserved better, faith that there was more to life than serving others' needs, faith that I was interesting and valuable in my own right. My phone rang on a snowy December evening, interrupting my work on a new painting. The caller ID showed David's number. "Mom," he said, "I have some news. Dad wants to see you." My first instinct was to say no. I'd helped Greg through his recovery, ensured he had resources to rebuild his life, maintained appropriate boundaries throughout the process. What more could he possibly need from me? "What does he want?" I asked. "He says he has something to tell you, something important. He's been asking for weeks, but I wasn't sure if I should even mention it." "David, I don't owe your father anything. If he has something to say, he can write a letter." "I know, Mom, but he's different, really different. And I think this might be important for you too, not just for him." Against my better judgment, I agreed to one meeting. Coffee in a neutral location with a time limit and clear boundaries. I would listen to whatever Greg had to say, and then I would decide if any response was warranted. We met at a small coffee shop in Park Slope, a place I'd chosen because it was close to my apartment but unfamiliar enough to both of us to feel neutral. Greg arrived early and was already seated when I walked in, looking nervous and older but somehow more present than I remembered. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down across from him. "I know you didn't have to." "You're right, I didn't. So whatever you have to say, make it count." He took a deep breath. "I've been in therapy, real therapy, not just the counseling at the rehabilitation center, and I've learned some things about myself that I need to share with you." I waited, curious despite myself. "I've been thinking about that Christmas toast, the one that started all of this, and I realized I need to tell you the truth about it. I know the truth. You were having an affair with my sister." "No," he said quietly. "That's what I let you believe. But it's not the whole truth." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you talking about?" "Margaret and we'd been talking, yes, meeting for coffee sometimes, talking on the phone, but there was no affair. Not the way you think." My world tilted slightly. "Then why?" "Because I was a coward. Because I was ashamed of how I'd treated you, how I'd taken you for granted, how I'd let you carry the weight of our entire life while I coasted. Because I saw how happy you made everyone else, and I couldn't stand that I was the only one who didn't appreciate you." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "That toast wasn't about being in love with Margaret. It was about wanting to hurt you the way I hurt inside every day, knowing what a failure I was as a husband. It was about destroying something beautiful because I couldn't stand looking at it and knowing how much better you deserved." I stared at him, processing his words. If what he was saying was true. The bank account, I managed. Adding Margaret's name was Margaret's idea. She said if I was going to leave you anyway, and she'd convinced me I should, then I might as well protect some assets for the future. She painted it as financial planning, but really she was positioning herself to benefit from our divorce. The room seemed to spin. "Are you telling me you destroyed our marriage for nothing? That you humiliated me in front of our family for no reason?" "I'm telling you I was a selfish, broken man who chose to blow up his life rather than do the work to fix it. I'm telling you that Margaret saw an opportunity to manipulate the situation to her advantage, and I let her because it was easier than facing the truth about myself." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this revelation. The affair I'd imagined, the betrayal that had been the final straw, apparently hadn't been what I thought at all. "Why didn't you tell me this 4 years ago?" "Because 4 years ago, I still thought I was the victim in our story. I thought you were too demanding, too exhausting, too much. It's taken therapy and a heart attack and almost dying alone to realize that you weren't the problem. I was." Greg reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "There's more. Things I found out about Margaret after you left. Things you need to know." He slid the envelope across the table. Inside were bank statements, emails, legal documents I couldn't immediately understand. "Margaret had been stealing from our mother's estate," he said quietly. "Money that was supposed to be split between you two. She'd been forging your signature for years, taking funds intended for your mother's care and using them for her own expenses." The documents swam before my eyes as the magnitude of Margaret's deception became clear. Thousands of dollars, withdrawn over years, all signed with a version of my name that was close enough to pass casual inspection. "She used the money I gave her access to as seed money for larger thefts," Greg continued. "When I finally understood what she'd done, I confronted her. That's when she disappeared from my life. Turns out she was never interested in me, just in the access to resources I could provide." I looked at these papers, evidence of a betrayal so deep and systematic that it made our marital problems seem almost insignificant by comparison. My sister, the person I'd sacrificed for, covered for, supported through every crisis, had been stealing from me for years. "There's one more thing," Greg said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your mother's jewelry, the pieces you inherited, Margaret took those too. She had copies made and replaced them before your mother died. The real jewelry was sold years ago. My hand went instinctively to the simple pearl necklace I was wearing, one of my mother's pieces that I'd treasured as a connection to her memory. If Greg was telling the truth, even this small comfort was built on a lie. Why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve the truth. Because you've been carrying guilt and pain over things that were never your fault. Because Margaret is still out there, probably looking for new people to manipulate, and you should know what she's capable of. I stared at the documents, my mind reeling. The sister I'd grieved losing, the relationship I'd spent years trying to understand and repair, had been built on deception from the beginning. What do you want from me, Greg? Forgiveness? Reconciliation? What's the end game here? He shook his head. Nothing. I want nothing from you except the chance to tell you the truth. You saved my life, not just by helping me through the recovery, but by showing me what real strength looks like. Watching you build a new life, seeing you thrive, made me realize I wanted to become worthy of the woman who'd once loved me, even if that woman never came back. And if I said she might? If I said knowing this changes things? I'd tell you not to. Eleanor, you've built something beautiful. You've become who you were meant to be. Don't sacrifice that for a broken man who's just learning how to be whole. We sat in silence for a long time, processing the weight of these revelations. Finally, I gathered up the papers and put them back in the envelope. I need time to think about all of this, I said. Of course. And Eleanor, I'm sorry for all of it, for the man I was, for the pain I caused, for the years we both lost to my cowardice. As I walked home through the December evening, the envelope heavy in my coat pocket, I felt oddly detached from the bombshells Greg had just dropped. The marriage was still over. These revelations didn't change that. The life I'd built was still mine, still worth protecting. But something shifted inside me as I processed the truth about Margaret's deception. The guilt I'd carried about not being a better sister, the confusion about where our relationship had gone wrong, the pain of feeling rejected by my own family. None of that had been based in reality. I'd been mourning the loss of something that had never actually existed. That night, I called Anna and told her everything Greg had revealed. She listened without interruption, then was quiet for a long time. "How do you feel?" she finally asked. "Empty," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. Like I've been grieving ghosts. Like I've been blaming myself for things that were never my fault. That's a lot to process. The weird thing is, it doesn't change anything important. My marriage was still broken, just for different reasons than I thought. Margaret was still someone who hurt me, just more systematically than I knew. The life I've built is still the right life for me, but I feel like I've been carrying weight that wasn't mine to carry. And knowing that I was never the problem they made me think I was, that's going to take some time to fully understand. Anna was quiet again. Then she said something that stopped me cold. "Eleanor, what if you'd been carrying that weight your whole life? What if these weren't just the last few years of your marriage, but decades of being made to feel responsible for other people's failures?" I thought about that conversation for weeks. Had I always been the family scapegoat? The one who absorbed blame and responsibility, while others escaped consequences for their choices? Had my willingness to sacrifice myself made me the perfect target for people who wanted to avoid facing their own shortcomings? The answer was uncomfortable, but undeniable. Yes. I'd been trained from childhood to smooth over problems, to take responsibility for other people's emotions, to sacrifice my own needs for family harmony. That training had made me vulnerable to people like Greg and Margaret, who benefited from having someone to blame for their own failures. But understanding the pattern didn't make me want to return to it. If anything, it reinforced how important my boundaries had become. I'd learned to distinguish between helping and enabling, between love and servitude, between family loyalty and self-sacrifice. I decided to have the jewelry appraised, just to confirm what Greg had told me. The appraiser's verdict was swift and decisive. "These are very good reproductions, but they're not genuine pearls. I'd estimate they're worth about $50 at most." So even my connection to my mother's memory had been corrupted by Margaret's greed. She'd stolen not just money, but the tangible reminders of the woman who'd raised us both. I could have been angry. I could have pursued legal action, tried to recover what had been stolen, demanded justice for years of deception. The old Eleanor might have done exactly that, spending her energy on trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. Instead, I took the fake jewelry to a donation center and left it in their box of costume pieces. Let someone else find joy in these pretties. I didn't need them to remember my mother's love. That Christmas, my fourth as a free woman, I hosted the same warm gathering in my small apartment. Anna and her daughter, David and his family, friends from my art classes, the neighbor who would otherwise spend the holiday alone. We ate good food, shared stories, watched the children play with toys that scattered across my living room floor. As we raised our glasses for the traditional toast, I thought about that devastating Christmas 4 years earlier. The humiliation I'd felt, the betrayal that had shattered my world, the pain that had driven me to rebuild my entire life. "What should we toast to this year?" David asked. "To truth," I said without hesitation. "To the courage to face difficult truths about ourselves and others. To the strength to rebuild when the foundations we thought we stood on turn out to be illusions. To Eleanor," Anna added, raising her glass higher, "for showing us all what it looks like to choose yourself without losing your capacity to love others." As I looked around my small apartment, filled with people who knew my story and valued my presence, I realized something profound. I had everything I'd ever actually wanted. Not the fantasy of perfect family love I'd chased for decades, but the reality of genuine affection freely given and freely received. The woman who'd sat at that terrible Christmas dinner, watching her husband toast her sister, had been invisible because she'd made herself invisible. She'd accepted crumbs because she'd believed crumbs were all she deserved. The woman sitting here now knew her own worth. She could be generous without being depleted, helpful without being exploited, loving without disappearing into someone else's needs. Spring came again, as it always does. I found myself planning another solo trip, this time to Ireland to paint the dramatic coastlines and ancient castles I'd dreamed about for years. Not because I was running from anything, but because I could. Because my life was mine to design, and I'd learned to dream in colors I'd never known existed. As I prepared for the trip, David stopped by to help me organize my art supplies and travel documents. He seemed thoughtful, almost melancholy. "What's on your mind?" I asked as we packed my easel into its traveling case. "I keep thinking about who you used to be," he said. "The mom I remember from when I was a kid. And I realize now that you weren't happy then either. You were just performing happiness, going through the motions. Are you feeling guilty about that?" "Maybe a little. I benefited from your performance. I got to have a mom who seemed to have everything together, who never complained, who made everyone else's life smooth. I never asked what that cost you." I sat down on the couch and patted the cushion next to me. "David, you were a child. It was never your job to manage my emotional well-being or fix my marriage. The performance I was doing was my choice, even if I didn't fully understand why I was doing it. But I'm an adult now. I've been an adult for years, and I still sometimes expect you to be the one who fixes things, who takes care of everyone else's problems. Do you?" "When?" He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "When Dad had his heart attack. I was relieved that you showed up to handle it. When Margaret caused all that drama, I was glad you dealt with it so I didn't have to pick sides. Even now, I sometimes catch myself assuming you'll be the one to organize family gatherings, remember important dates, smooth over conflicts. I hadn't realized he was aware of those patterns, much less thinking critically about them. "What would you like to do differently?" I asked. "I want to contribute more. Not just to your life, but to my own family's life. I want my kids to see me as someone who takes responsibility, who doesn't need his mother to manage his relationships." "That sounds like a good goal. Will you help me learn how?" I almost said yes automatically, falling back into old habits of fixing and managing and teaching. Then I caught myself. "No," I said gently, "but I'll support you while you figure it out yourself. There's a difference." He smiled, that genuine smile I'd been seeing more of since I'd learned to set boundaries. "Thanks, Mom, for everything, for showing me what real strength looks like." After he left, I spent the evening putting finishing touches on my latest painting, a self-portrait where I looked directly at the viewer with calm, confident eyes. The woman in the painting wasn't young or conventionally beautiful, but she radiated something more valuable, a sense of complete self-possession. This was who I'd become, someone who could love without losing herself, help without sacrificing her own well-being, be generous without being depleted. Someone who understood that the right kind of love doesn't require you to become smaller. My phone rang as I cleaned my brushes. Anna's name appeared on the screen. "How's the packing going?" she asked. "Almost done. I'm excited about this trip." "You should be. Ireland is going to love you." "Anna," I said suddenly, "thank you. For everything. For being the first person to see me when I couldn't see myself. Miha, you saved yourself. I just happened to be there when you were ready to be found." That night, I dreamed about Ireland, green hills rolling toward dramatic coastlines, ancient stone circles standing against cloudy skies, small villages with colorful houses clustered around harbors where fishing boats bobbed at anchor. In my dream, I was painting these scenes with bold, confident strokes, unafraid to capture not just what I saw but what I felt. My easel was set up on a cliff overlooking the ocean, and the wind whipped through my hair as I worked. I wasn't alone in the dream. But I wasn't dependent on anyone else for my happiness either. I was exactly who I'd always been underneath all the years of performance and self-sacrifice. A woman capable of great love, fierce independence, and profound creativity. The best part about the dream was this. When I woke up, I knew it wasn't just a fantasy. It was a preview of a life I'd earned through courage and choice, and the gradual, difficult, magnificent work of learning to value myself. Tomorrow, I would fly to Ireland with my paints and brushes and decades of hard-won wisdom. I would paint landscapes that spoke to my soul, meet people who knew nothing of my history, and continue writing the story of Eleanor Patterson, artist, survivor, free woman. And that, I realized as sunlight began to filter through my apartment windows, was the most beautiful ending I could have imagined. Except it wasn't an ending at all. It was just the latest chapter in a life I'd finally learned to live on my own terms. Have you ever lived something similar to my story? Have you known someone who has walked this path from invisible servitude to authentic freedom? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe. Sometimes sharing our pain and transformation is the only way to let others know they're not alone in theirs. Because no matter how long and bitter the winter, spring always finds a way to bloom again.